Hare Krishna. Vanshakalpa tarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. So welcome to our continuous study of Srimad Bhagavatam. We're Canto 1, Chapter 2, Divinity and Divine Service. And we have reached text number 10 in that work. So before we begin, I'll say, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So text 10. Called Divinity and Divine Service, which we've been talking about the text before last about Dharma, what the Dharma use of your life is, to be attracted, to foster attraction to the messages of God, and then that everything that all dharmas should be used for ultimate liberation, and your occupational duties should not be used to cultivate sense gratification. And so that's theme is continued now in text 10. Kamasya nindriya pritir labho jiveta yavatat jivasya tattagignasa narto yascheha karma bihi. Life's desires should never be directed toward sense gratification. One should desire only a healthy life or self-preservation, since a human being is meant for inquiry about the absolute truth. Nothing else should be the goal of one's work. This is a formula for your life right here. In just a few words. Swami translates it, for one who desires apavarga, that word was used in the previous verse, meaning basically liberation or salvation. For one who desires apavarga, sense pleasure attained from enjoying sense objects is not the goal, as long as one lives. The goal of life is inquiry into the highest truth. What is accomplished by prescribed duties is not the goal. And we always heard Prabhupada that once you've reached the human form of life, your business is inquiry into the absolute truth. That's what human life is for. The other animal things that everybody shares, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, that's animal life. But human life is actually, you have this brain and this ability to actually understand the ultimate truth, the tattva jignasa it should be. Kamasya indriya kamasya na indriya priti. What should be desires should not be concerned with indriya priti. This is na indriya priti of desires. It should not be. The indriya is the senses, so priti, satisfaction of the senses. Jiveta yavata, well, yeah, sense preservation is okay. Just to stay alive, to keep yourself healthy, basically. Prabhupada was always inquiring about your health, yeah? And he himself, in his material occupation, was a pharmacist, concerned with people's health. So ultimate health is here. But still, how much of sense indriya priti, sense satisfaction, you need to be healthy? Stay healthy, or even I guess health and long life, since Ayurveda means is long life anyway. That's what it's about. That should be. So what is the gain? What is the business? Jiva of the jiva, tattva jignasa. Inquiry, jignasa. I mean, the Vedanta Sutta, Tattva Brahma Jignasa. Your business is, as a human being, as Brahma Jignasa. That's now there should be Brahma Jignasa. In here it says Tattva, thusness, which is a name for Brahman, absolute truth, or all absolute truth. Tattva Jignasa. And nothing else. Na artha yacha iha. Nothing else should be used by your occupational activities. Nothing else should be the goals of your work. Or the alternative reading by Bhanuswami is, what is accomplished by prescribed duties is not the goal. If you just do your varnashrama prescribed duty, that's not the goal. It goes beyond that. And the word that's translated different ways is this jiveta, which Prabhupada just describes as self-preservation. But Bhanuswami, in his purport, takes this word yavatat jiveta as long as one lives, both having to do with long life or preserving life, because this ayus in Ayurveda is ayus with a long A, means life, vital power, vigor, health, duration of life, long life. So both of these are acceptable translations. So I'm going to read Prabhupada's purport now, and then we'll go back over that. You can spend the whole class just on this verse, believe me. Lots of classes. He says, the completely bewildered material civilization is wrongly directed toward the fulfillment of desires in sense gratification. See, every one of these sentences you should meditate on. The completely bewildered material civilization, okay, is wrongly directed. Oh, how is it wrongly directed? It makes it completely bewildered for the fulfillment of desires in sense gratification. And then he goes on, in such civilization, in all spheres of life, the ultimate end is sense gratification. So that's what he amplifies it now, all spheres of life. And now we're going to have a list of 6 spheres in the next sentence. In politics, social service, altruism, philanthropy, and ultimately in religion or even salvation, the very same tint of sense gratification is ever increasingly prominent. So that there's the list, right? These 6 spheres of religion and salvation being dharma and then ultimate dharma. He separates them off like this. And you think you're going up and something higher and higher, but actually sense gratification. And then he says, ever increasingly. We'll talk about these, go back over them. So then in the purport, he really talks about 2 of them, especially. He says, in the political field, the leaders of men fight with one another to fulfill their personal sense gratification. As soon as voters are dissatisfied in their own sense gratification, they dethrone the leaders. That is, if they can do that. The leaders must always disappoint the voters by not satisfying their senses. So there you have it. In a few concise sentences, the whole world is going. Applies today, doesn't it? In the United States of America. The same is applicable to all other fields. So he's saying here, this is what's going on, the sense gratification in different fields. He's described it one in the political field, and so he just says the same is applicable in all other fields. No one is serious about the problems of life. Then we skip over to salvation. Even those who are on the path of salvation desire to become one with the absolute truth and desire to commit spiritual suicide for sense gratification. That's this merging into impersonal Brahman, and the whole, you disappear, you're vanished, you become one, And so that's like a spiritual suicide for sense gratification. But the Bhagavatam says that one should not live for sense gratification. So, and then there's this important sentence: one should satisfy the senses only in so much as required for self-preservation, and not for sense gratification. Because the body is made of senses. Now, when he says that, the karmindriya and gyanindriya, the instruments are the instruments by which you take in the world of hearing, seeing, tasting, touching, and smelling. And those instruments by which you act back on the world, those are called karmindriya, your instruments of motion, of manipulation, these two pickers and stealers, as Hamlet calls them, your fingers, and the instruments of tasting and sound production and removing waste. So these are the karmindriya. Those are because the body is made of senses, which also requires a certain amount of satisfaction. Yeah, just, try to stop them all, it's death. There are regulative directions for satisfaction of such senses. So how much so you can do? It's given in the Vedas what is the amount of sense gratification. And the basic thing is for a healthy life, and especially for bhakti, Rishikesha Rishikena Sevanam Bhakti Rucha. Bhakti means engaging the senses in the service of the master of the senses, so we don't neglect them. But there are regulative directions for satisfaction of such senses, but the senses are not meant for unrestricted enjoyment. For example, marriage or the combination of a man with a woman is necessary for progeny, offspring, but it is not meant for sense enjoyment. There's news to the world, huh? In the absence of voluntary restraint, there is propaganda for family planning. But this was used in India for either birth control or abortion. Those are both family planning. There's I'll tell you something that was going on during Prabhupada's time. There's propaganda for family planning. So that was going on because overpopulation was the big thing then, and they were really worried about too much population, But In absence of voluntary restraint, there is propaganda for family planning, but foolish men do not know that family planning is automatically executed as soon as there is search after the absolute truth. And in the book, these are capitalized, absolute truth. Seekers of the absolute truth are never allured by unnecessary engagements in sense gratification, because the serious students seeking the absolute truth are always overwhelmed with the work of researching the truth. These words are capitalized here, absolute truth. And in every sphere of life, therefore, so you remember there are the different spheres he talked about at the beginning of the purport? In every sphere of life, therefore, the ultimate end must be seeking after the absolute truth, and that sort of engagement will make one happy, because he will be less engaged in varieties of sense gratification. And what that absolute truth is explained as follows, and that's the next verse. So that's Prabhupada's purport here. As I said, Bhanu Swami's translation, going back to the last verse, one who desires apavarga, liberation, sense pleasure attained from enjoying, sense object is not the goal. As long as one lives, the goal of life is inquiry into the highest truth. What is accomplished by prescribed duties is not the goal, if you only go so far as doing it. And he's got a fairly short purport, which he calls a commentary. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's purport, yes, translated by Bhanu Swami. The pleasure of the senses, indriya pritihi, arising from enjoying the sense objects, is not the goal, labha. Rather, as long as one lives, yavata jiveta, one should work for the fulfillment of life, apavarga. The pleasure of the senses from enjoyment for the jnanis or the yogis, consisting of the secondary results that appear along with the desired results, is designated as results of action. So that's a little thing that Prabhupada doesn't go in that direction. You practice Jnani and Yogi, you may get also some good things coming, but that's not what you're really after. So that's just restricted to the talking here about the Jnanis and the Yogis. He says, since Jnana and Yoga are transformations of nishkama karma. Now this is a very favorite word of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, is nishkama karma, activities without any desire for the result. Activities for either its own sake. There's a lot of people translate the Bhagavad Gita that way, but it's detached. You're not attached to the results. Without attachment to the results. It says nishkama karma. But you talked about people, and I've talked to Indians who think that what the Bhagavad Gita is teaching is do your duty, period. Almost. Anyway, since jnana and yoga are transformations of nishkama karma, they perceive whatever happiness and distress they experience as the result of karma. For the devotees, so in other words, there's still some karma going, that even if they are still doing karma, but nishkama, still happiness and distress is caused by that karma. and you just don't worry about it. But he goes on, for the devotee, in contrast, the pleasure of the senses from sense objects which accompany bhakti, because sometimes that might be there, however, are not called fruits of action, karma. So they have still some karma that they have to endure or enjoy, but are not the fruits of action, since bhakti is not a transformation of karma. The devotees, however, perceive happiness to be the result of bhakti only. They regard suffering as the mercy of the Lord. So this is in contrast to the jnanis and the yogis. Something happens, that's the result, they get some happiness, but they think that's just the accidental result of their karma. But here, devotees, happiness comes from bhakti, and suffering comes from bhakti because it's the mercy of the Lord. Prabhupada describes, how when he came to Vrindavan, he got gored by a cow or a bull, and just when he'd taken sannyas, gone to Vrindavan, began his big project of translation and so on. And he said, I accepted that it was Krishna's mercy, but I couldn't understand how it was. But later I understood. But he didn't say what it was, but that's, he accepted it as Krishna's mercy, although you may not understand how it is, And then Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur quotes from Bhagavatam 10:88:8, Yasyaham agranidnami harishye tad dhanam shanai tato dhanam tyajant yasya swajana dukkha dukkitam. If I especially favor someone, this is Krishna speaking, I gradually deprive him of his wealth. Then the relatives and the friends of such a poverty-stricken man abandon him. In this way, he suffers one distress after another. So, just to say about Prabhupada, he said that he was doing all this pharmaceutical business and trying to save up money so he would have some money to go to the West. He said, but Krishna made me a poor man. He made me a business failure, he said. So that's another mercy. Because it was a business failure, he simply had to reduce everything to giving up the whole business and just doing the Bhagavatam by itself. His family members turned against him because his marriage was arranged on the basis of his material prospects, and his wife and some of his children anywhere expecting, inheritance and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so this is how Prabhupada was thinking, that he was, his relatives and friends abandoned him, So he experienced something like that. Anyway, taking this statement of the Lord into consideration, according to the particular case, the devotee's suffering should be regarded as the direct action of the Lord, or a result of devotional offenses. So it's either one or the other. But you can't tell them apart sometimes, You should look and see. The goal of life, jivasya, is inquiry into the highest truth, tattva jignasa. What is accomplished, iha, by that performance of karmas, such as attaining swarga, is not the goal. So that's a quite interesting purport there. Here we have this idea of this purport of Prabhupada. He gives this whole idea of this completely bewildered material civilization. And remember, he wrote this before he came to America. He could see what was happening, the bewildered material civilization. And remember, India is being told to be engaged in economic development. you're a poor country, you know, and a third world country, and you got all these problems and all this stuff. And what we got to do is, they were hearing this from the British, remember, you know, when it was a colony. So they were being oriented in that way also for sense gratification. And so here he talks about these these 6 different spheres. He called them politics, social service, altruism, philanthropy, religion, and even salvation. All these tint of sense gratification is ever increasingly prominent because it might be that to really get into altruism and philanthropy, a lot of people thinking that's involved in controlling the government and having the government, that you should do that. And for some people, the really thing is a kind of sense gratification from altruism and philanthropy is you have your name on buildings. They just in America, there's a statue of Lincoln freeing the slaves, you know, and there's a slave down there, and it's now being taken down because, you know, that's his fame. He freed the slaves. It didn't really happen to black people so abruptly, but, you know, that's what he was famous for. And so a lot of people, that may be the goal of this, to become famous for their good works that you did, and the material development of future generations, you know. And then future generations may judge you harshly for what then was a big thing, you know, to do, was a step forward. And other people are trying to undo the things they do, like Teddy Roosevelt made all this things in the West of special places that were public parks and Yosemite and all these places set aside, and everybody wants to get there and develop them so they can make money, you know. So, you know, you're a hero, and then you're a villain, and then you're a villain, and then you're a hero. But there's the goal many times is to be satisfied that, yeah, I'm helping other people, I'm helping future generations, you know. And so that's kind of ever increasingly prominent in a way. It's different sense gratification, but it's sense gratification. And then also in salvation, yeah, let me become God, you know. And Prabhupada said, even those who are on the path of salvation desire to become one with the absolute truth and desire to commit spiritual suicide for sense gratification. So then he gives how much sense gratification should you have? Self-preservation. To keep your body healthy to use in Krishna service. It's not my body. These senses belong to Krishna. I'll take care of them. And that's all there. And then he says marriage, you know. You're supposed to make good progeny. Therefore, you know, we have our samskara for conceiving a child, where you chant all day long, and you don't have sex unless the goal is reproduction. Otherwise, you refrain. But you know, have the satisfaction of having a spouse and children and offspring like that. But everything else is entangling. In the absence of voluntary restraint, there is propaganda of family planning. Remember, with the Industrial Revolution came a big increase in population. I had a course in college about this problem of the overpopulation problem at that time in the 60s. You know, that was the big. There's too much overpopulation because there was a population boom. Because actually what happened in America, well, in the West, developed West, not the progressive, developed West, is that when countries began to industrialize, they found out that when they studied agrarian culture, civilizations, there was both a high and steady birth rate and also a high and steady death rate. Most of the deaths, infant mortality. You can read back in the 19th century, these women that had 8 children, 4 surviving. There was just a high death rate because of infant mortality. That's what was happening. But then with Industrial Revolution, there came a few public health measures of things like just clean water. They cleaned up the water somewhat. And as a result, when the Industrial Revolution was going on, is that the birth rate remained high, but the death rate, mostly because of infant mortality, began to drop. And you had this gap between this kind of, after the Industrial Revolution, this kind of high and steady birth rate and a low and steady mortality rate. And so therefore the population exploded in all these countries. And then, then the death rate, then the birth rate went down. And you had both low after you went through the Industrial Revolution, because there was some kind of family planning. If it wasn't abstinence, it was various other methods. I don't want to get into it, but of different birth control. That's when that became a propaganda method of birth control, mostly to save women from what they had to go through, and so that was this propaganda for family planning. But then when India started to industrialize, the same thing began to happen, and the same propaganda for family planning. And so what would the Prabhupadas talk about this propaganda? Actually, what was beginning to happen is that they would send teams of physicians into rural areas, because the urban areas were a little more so-called progressive, and they would do vasectomies, involuntary vasectomies, where the little operation you do on men to keep the sperm from getting into the ejaculation, so you could keep on having sex but no sperm would be there. That's vasectomy, birth control for men. And so they were doing it on sadhus even in Vrindavan. Prabhupada complained about this propaganda for family practice. And then, of course, the other one is abortion, which is now, of course, they said, but foolish men do not know that family planning is automatically executed as soon as there is a search after the absolute truth, because there's some ability to control your senses, especially that. So that's what he's talking about here. And so we are never allured by unnecessary engagement in sense gratification. Yeah, if you want to have a family, sure. And then you can do like Prabhupada gave us the formula for that. Because the big thing is the work of researching the absolute truth. The problem with straight-on sense gratification is that it makes it impossible to have spiritual experience. Our regular principles are also principles of knowledge. And the things that are in the Bhagavatam or even other spiritual literature of transcendence, people cannot have those experiences as long as they're engaged in sense gratification. Sense gratification and self-realization do not go well together. It's one or the other. And so, and if you really want to be a real, sadhu, especially in the notion of even in personal realization. Then you go to the forest. Then you're really abstemious. There you don't eat very much. You don't, you go through incredible austerities. If you're a real yogi and you really practice Ashtanga yoga, as Patanjali said you do it, you don't have much sense gratification at all. And that's really beyond the range of most people. But the regulations of Bhakti Yoga can be done in householder life, or even in the middle of business or whatever occupation you have. You can do that occupation, but without being attached to the results of your work. So then Prabhupada says, in every sphere of life, so this in Bhakti Yoga, it takes you to the highest level, and it's also practical. You can do it in any sphere of life, what you are doing. The ultimate end should be seeking after the absolute truth. And that sort of engagement will make one happy, because he will be less engaged in varieties of sense gratification. In other words, sense gratification is a kind of counterfeit happiness. Anything that comes to an end does not make you happy. We are eternal and we want eternal pleasure. That's the, alle Lust will Ewigkeit, all pleasure desires eternity. It says that you said that. Yeah, that's what you need. All joy seeks eternity. That goes together. But when you get the material sense gratification, Prabhupada said all they enjoy is a little mental happiness. Oh, I was a famous person. Oh, I had a good life. Oh, I did well for this person. Oh, future generations will remember the works I wrote, something like that. Mental. It's just mental. That's it. And that really doesn't, you can, okay, I grasped that straw, but you're not really satisfied, because that real desire is to engage in the service of Krishna. So that's how Prabhupada's purport we understand here. And it's really quite a wonderful purport to see right at the beginning of the Bhagavatam now, to understand this. I don't know how much time we have left. Just 5 minutes.
You can pause here if you want for discussion.
Yeah, let's pause here for discussion. But since this thing is about, it will take a while, I think. Probably the purports aren't so long here, but then we can go on from there. Yeah, probably a better place to stop.
Okay, so if anybody has any questions or reflections, anything that struck you, please feel free to share them. You can open up the conversation here. Go ahead and type your comment or question into the comment section if you're on Facebook, and if you're on the phone, you can press *6 to unmute yourself. And the chat box is also open on Ravindra Svarupa's website. That's RSDasa.com. There's certainly a lot to chew upon. And Mandaleshwari Devidasi, she says, Hare Krishna, when a devotee child leaves the path of bhakti and becomes attracted to material life, which causes a lot of pain for the devotee parents, Is that also Krishna's mercy? How can we understand this kind of situation?
Well, you can understand it in different ways. As a parent, you do the best you can under the circumstances to make your child Krishna conscious. And they don't do it all the way, or they do it halfway, or they do it some of the time. Uh, uh, you can be disappointed, but you should at least, and you can't figure, remember, your children that come to you also have some background of their previous existence, and they took this birth, and you do the best you can with them. But you can't like keep once they're 18 years old, you've really done all you can do. If you keep on their case all the time, you only continue to alienate them. And sometimes what they may do, they'll come to appreciate later, or they appreciate the good things. But our movement still also in the very beginning was not very together. And so some of us did the real thing and sent our children off to Gurukula, where they found out they were also not treated properly. And you can only say, well, I did the best I could. And if your children are not that interested in Krishna consciousness, preserve a relationship with them, because they'll grow older and you grow older, and sometime they may want. So you should at least not be on their case all their time. Once they're grown, you should just make your peace with them, and don't nag or put them down or all this other kind of stuff, or tell them how disappointed you are or whatever it may be. But keep the door open, and you'll see what happens. And whatever they have will, if they have engaged in material activity, well, they'll take birth again, but they still have something that's been implanted in the spirit soul, if not in the mind, and it will continue. You don't know how many lives we've been through, or how many parents we disappointed in previous births too, So that's my reflections on that.
Karuna Shakti Prabhu, formerly known as Bhakta Karl, congratulations. We never publicly congratulated you on this call for your initiation, but Karuna Shakti Prabhu. He says, an anecdote in relation to this statue issue. I have to live in an area where 3 streets were named after prominent figures of Germany's brief stint in African colonization. It was decided some years ago that the streets should be renamed because those figures would nowadays be considered criminals. The issue became so controversial that even the New York Times published an article about it. One of the streets, literally around the corner from where I live, was supposed to be renamed after the famous Angolan queen, and I don't know how to pronounce this, Ninzga, who fought against Portuguese invaders. However, when the decision became public, people complained that she was not so virtuous after all. She traded slaves with the Dutch and was also referred to as Machiavelli's African sister.
Whoa. Thank you for that example. Yeah, well, they're really busy renaming things in America now again, because of thinking that, the thing called Black Lives Matter, and people are starting to get a little lesson in how people feel they've been treated, and have been treated, actually, what it was like to be basically a second-class citizen, even after the slaves were freed and they weren't slaves, and there was a whole effort to keep them separate in some kind of subservience up until now, and it's going on still, Yeah. I mean, I saw this myself because my mother was a New York Yankee, from the city of New York City, and a nurse, and very, very liberal. But my father was a Georgia family that had been there for generations and generations, and when I was, witness to some of the conflicts of how people were, different ideas of how people should be treated right there.
Bhakti Pala asks, some people, including some devotees, say that some degree of sexual or sensual activity is needed for physical and mental health. Srila Prabhupada also gave different levels of instructions to different devotees, ranging from once a month just for having kids to just restricting it to one's spouse. Can you please comment?
As far as I know, we are instructed by Prabhupada that the initiation vow for no illicit sex meant just for the propagation of children. And then he gave us the formula of chanting, how many rounds? It's been a long time since I've done anything like that. A certain amount of rounds all day long before the Garbhodhanhana Samskara, when you, even in Vedic times, when you try to conceive a child, there was a purification ceremony so that the child would be spiritually well off, this Garbhodhanhana Samskara. And the way he had to do, I think we had to chant 50 rounds or something like that, husband and wife together before engaging in sexual congress to beget a God-conscious child. That's what Prabhupada's instructions are. If you can't do the best thing, then do the next best thing, but you understand that you're not doing the thing that Prabhupada wanted. You can work up to it, that's okay. But the initiation vows, and it may be that maybe some gurus today aren't telling everybody the whole story. That would be cheating. But you should understand that the child will not be completely given the advantage of the samskara, and the man and the woman will also, their spiritual progress will be retarded because of this engagement just for sensual pleasure. Sense gratification and self-realization go ill together. And you cannot even have the entry-level realization, I'm not this body, while engaging in sense gratification. Sense gratification forces you to identify yourself with the material body. You can't help it unless you do it in the proper way. Because that's really entry level, right? Aham brahmasmi, I'm not the body. That's a formula for liberation. But do the best you can. As I said, if you don't complete it, okay, next time you will. But you should understand what the actual goal is. Why it's there. It's not just to make us miserable or to deprive us of things. If you can't get there now, keep going and try to get there. Next step, next step, next step.
Kendra Prabhu says, we were talking about this statement the other day. Quote, the voters adore the so-called leaders only when they promise sense gratification, end quote. Our thought was that sense gratification in this context could mean all sorts of things, from tax breaks for the rich to rights for special interest groups, etc.
Yep, that's right. So many different things.
And Bhakti Paulus is quite clear, thank you, in response to your statements there. I'll jump in here with a question. This from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary saying how the devotees perceive happiness to be the result of bhakti only. They regard suffering as the mercy of the Lord. And we know this is when Prabhupada talks about this quite often, that the difficulties a devotee may go through in one way or another is the mercy of the Lord. And from my experience in talking with friends and when they're going through hard times, devotee friends, is that they have a sense of this, that they know this is what they ought to be thinking and feeling. That's kind of the higher level. But, and myself included, we may not always be there at that actual point of realization, especially when you're in the middle of something really challenging. So I find that this idea that Krishna, somehow it's Krishna's mercy, it can both be a relieving factor when you're going through something hard, and it can also be a frustrating factor. And I've even, sometimes devotees can even get to the point of maybe feeling some anger towards Krishna in the moment of like, well, if this is your mercy, like, why are you doing this to me? What's a good way, in your life experience, what's a good way to counsel devotees? I know each situation is unique, but what's a good way to counsel devotees when they're going through a hard time and kind
of... first of all, you should appreciate their hard time. So, you're just in Maya, you should appreciate the difficulties people are going through, and if you're in a position to help alleviate it in some way, or at least sympathize with them, that's a good thing to do. I mean, don't discount their feelings. Say, no, you can appreciate what you're going through, and then try to just see how talking it over. Don't preach at them, but a lot of times when people are like just preaching at people and telling them, you don't, they've got a problem they're not dealing with. That's often a sign of that. So being sympathetic and trying to work with them to find some way to come to at least a next step. If you're going to go forward 1 foot, you have to pass through 12 inches. So if you have to take it a little slower, okay, but keep moving toward your goal. That's to me, that's the sort of practical thing people have to do. And you be honest, I know this isn't right. Krishna, please help me. I want to do the next thing. I want to do the right thing. I don't know why. Please show me what to do. If Krishna knows you're willing to take that step, he'll show you what it is and put the right circumstances that you can do it. But if you just got an absolute refusal, then that sort of ends the conversation for a while.
So it seems to be it's actually quite healthy to acknowledge your own feelings and say, like, Krishna, this is how I'm processing this right now, and it might change from day to day. But I also find it kind of interesting of, you often say take the next step, or as you're saying, to go a foot, you have to go 12 inches. That's also a helpful tactic when people are dealing with anxiety and on that nature of when things become too big, too overwhelming to think about the moment. And okay, all you have to, let's get through this one day or 1 hour or whatever it is. And that is often a helpful tool for anxiety.
Now, let me just say that a lot of times you find out that people in that situation, when they just chant japa, they're worrying about their problems, they're worrying about their difficulties, and really, to me at least, this is just my own experience, that when I do japa, it's a really simple arena, it's just like everything is out of the way except there's you and the holy name and your mind. Those are the three things on stage, so to speak, three actors on the stage. You, your mind, and the holy name. And then, and one should chant on the clearing stage. Remember that when you chant japa, there's the offensive stage, clearing stage, and pure stage. Not very few of us can go right away to the pure stage, but the Bhaktivinoda Thakur tells us, and to me this was like a really good thing to know, that the offense from which all other offenses spring is inattentiveness while chanting, because there are 10 offenses when chanting the holy name, and one of which is to maintain material desires. Is not to have them, that's not the offense, but maintaining it, that's an offense against the holy name. It means you don't have complete faith in the holy name. So when you chant, you should pay attention, not be inattentive while chanting. Pramadaha. It's another word for insanity too. Is for inattentiveness. Your mind is distracted. Hamlet says, "Oh, this distracted globe." It's a synonym for being insane. So, you fix your mind on the holy name, and when it wanders or goes away because you're worried about your problems, you got this, you got that, you want this, you're restless, it's somehow, bring it back. Because really the thing you got to deal with is your mind. And bring your attention back to the holy name. It wanders again, bring it back, and don't quit. Don't quit. And the more you can do that, the more things will start to change if you're stuck in one place. Just doing that. This is, you're chanting on the clearing stage. Your clearing stage of chanting, and then the pure stage will eventually come. But if you quit and just want to have your official rounds while the television set is on, or whatever, that is not very powerful at all. That's my only suggestion. Is that's the place to start. It's because it's just the simplest place. And then if you're serious and you're showing Krishna you're serious, other things in your either internal or external environment will start to change. You got two environments. One environment is your mind, because you're not the mind, and the other environment is the dwelling place your body lives in. Those things will start to change, guaranteed, if you show Krishna you're serious and you really want to advance. And if you're not serious, pray to become serious. Become serious about being serious. Yeah. Somewhere you can get on the path.
Thank you. That was helpful. We should have a few comments, or actually Adi Devi has a question here as well. And just as a heads up, we are about ready to start a really heavy-duty thunderstorm. So if the internet suddenly cuts out, that's why. Anyhow, Adi Devi asks, she says, sometimes medical advice goes against a woman conceiving to protect her mental and physical health. In such circumstances, should she carry on becoming a mother depending on Krishna?
I would have to know more about it to give any kind of good advice on that particular matter. That's all I can say.
Kula Pradeep Prabhu says, wonderful, practical, and profound advice. Thank you so much, Gurudev. 2 hearts and prayer hands emoticon. And we also have Gaura Shakti Prabhu says, Hare Krishna, dear Gurudev. Please accept my humble obeisances. I just want to thank you for the wonderful class and the great parenting advice too. Exclamation point. And Adi Devi also says, Hare Krishna, Gurudev. Please accept my humble obeisances. Thank you so much for the wonderful class. And David Dharana said, thank you very much for your class. And I believe... Shaila Vasani Devi Dasa says, Hare Krishna, please accept my humble obeisances early on. And that's the news.
Okay. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Yeah, and so that wraps up for today. And I am going to be sending out an email tonight regarding on Friday and Saturday, Ravindra Svarupa is giving class as part of what's called the Festival of the Holy Name that Ramapada Swami and Badahari Prabhu are doing. It's a virtual Holy Name retreat, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Ravindra Svarupa will be speaking at from 10:30 to 12:15. No, 10:45 to 12:15 on both Friday and Saturday, on topics like the Shikshastika and also Bhakti as a process of knowledge. So more information will come out about that. That wraps it up for today.
Okay, thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.